loud in my ears. Okay, we got one person logged in so far. Morgan, are you presenting from Inman? You say
No,
that's where you
I'm
live?
yeah, I live in Inman, but I came to my office and at
Got you. How's you holding it down in Spartanburg today? Is it okay over there? How's the
yeah,
humidity? Did you swim to work?
pretty awful. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
try to rush inside as quick as I can.
Okay. Got some more folks trickling in. Melody and Sissy, thanks for joining us today. Tommy, you know, you know where we stand. So, okay, guys, I think, or y'all, I think we're gonna wait until 12:05. Give folks a few more minutes to trickle in, and then we'll get started because we want to be respectful of our attendees' time and especially our wonderful guest speaker today. Morgan, can I ask you kind of a topic-related question while we're waiting?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Not to put you exactly on the spot, but you're on the spot. Do you think that I went to a training last year that talked about technology use with adolescents, and they talked about the difference between various generations, basically what technology you grew up with and how pre-internet and post really proliferation of internet makes a big difference. Do
Mhm.
you have you seen anything like in your own work or in your research about is there hope on the horizon for this stuff? Like, are things going to continue to be better? Yeah, as we're more inoculated. Is that the right word? Inoculated. I don't think it is, but uh, growing up with this stuff and knowing how to manage it better and not having to learn technology etiquette as an adult versus having it in your life the whole time. Good
Yeah,
thing, bad thing, some of both.
yeah, I think some of both, and it depends on a lot of factors, but I think especially as you get older and you start learning how technology is used in so many different workforces, having grown up with technology makes it a lot easier to not have to do a lot of onboarding and teaching yourself. But if you're not careful there, and that's sort of what this presentation will focus some on too, is there's some good uses for technology if you're intentional about that, but also there's a lot of ways that that can turn poorly if you're using that or if you're not intentional about how you're using it. Um, so yeah, we'll definitely get to jump into some of that today.
Awesome. Uh, Beverly and Kayla, good to have you. Beverly, I was just bragging on you before we got on, talking about your presentation at the symposium last year on hoarding and excessive collecting and how good it was. Other than being called out personally, but that's okay. That means that you had information that would resonate. That's what we're looking for. And I talked to my therapist about it, so that's okay. All right, guys, it's 12:05. We're going to get started as we said. For those of you who don't know, my name is Ross Hill. I'm Executive Director of Mental Health America of Spartanburg County. I'm also a therapist in the upstate at Modern Wellness Family Counseling. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today for the July edition of our educational series. We are joined today by Dr. Morgan Strickland. Morgan is an assistant professor of marriage and family therapy and the associate program director for the MFT program at Converse University. I keep forgetting it's a university now. She provides supervision to students in their second year of the master's program at Converse, through the partnership Converse shares with Emerge Family Therapy. Morgan works with individuals, couples, and family therapy within her small private practice and has worked in both traditional therapeutic settings and integrated healthcare. Her research focuses on family violence and how survivors can remain resilient to adverse outcomes, Sound like some ACE scores. She is interested in how violence is perpetuated through communication technologies and how MFTs and other mental health professionals can better assess and intervene in this pervasive problem. Her dissertation on cyber dating abuse won the 2020 AAMFT, which is the American Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, Foundation Graduate Student Research Award. She and her husband Jeffrey live in Inman with their 1-year-old daughter and enjoy spending time outside as a family and playing in an adult sand volleyball league. You're going to brag on that, and normally we'd make you demonstrate, but since this is virtual, it's a little hard. But next time, maybe.
Next time I'll be ready.
Yep. Guys, or attendees, Morgan said that it is fine for you to ask questions as we go. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat and I'll pass them on to her. Morgan, you ready?
I'm ready.
All right, I will hand it over to your capable hands then.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being willing to attend. And I hope that you'll be able to take away some good information from this session. We are first going to start off and talk a little bit about how we use technology and sort of do an inventory of the way that we use, especially that our cell phones. And then we're going to jump into the role of technology within couple relationships or romantic relationships. So part of what I want to focus on today is that there are two sides of this coin. There's a lot of positive ways that technology influences our relationships and can influence our relationships, but there's also a lot of negative that comes with that as well. And so especially for clinicians or those people who are working with others who are hoping to improve couple relationships, we'll talk a lot about those negatives and how we can start assessing for technology use and how people use technology within those relationships, and then focus a little bit more attention on cyber abuse or cyber dating abuse. And that's sort of my wheelhouse in terms of my own research. So we'll talk a little bit about that, and then hopefully at the end talk a little bit more about suggestions for interventions if we see that there are some negative ways that technology is being used. Okay, so for my background, my lens is coming from a therapeutic stance. So a lot of what I'll be talking about is looking at things through the lens of working with couple relationships in therapy. But I'm hoping that you'll also, if you're not a therapist or a clinician, you'll also be able to take away some things that are just reminders for you and your own relationships, or ways to take this back to your career field. All right, so the first thing I want to do to start out is for you to take out your own phone. Hopefully you have it nearby. And these instructions are for those who have iPhones, so forgive me if I'm leaving people out who have Androids. But if you click on settings, and then you go to screen time in your phone, and then right under that first chart, if you click see all activity, this gives you a breakdown of how you have used your phone. Right, so I don't know if some of you may never have used this before, some may use it pretty often, but it can be kind of eye-opening if you are somebody who doesn't really take inventory often of how you're using your phone. And for me, I can see that, you know, there's a good bit of time spent on social media. I also spend a lot of time using my Safari app because it was Amazon Prime Day this week, if you guys are aware of that. And I knew not to trust myself with the Amazon app, so I've used my browser a lot for that. And then if you go to the top and swipe for the chart, you can see last week's average too. And each week you can kind of see a breakdown of what you've done. So just ask yourself, you know, what do you notice here? Are there areas where you feel like you have used your phone in ways that don't make yourself very proud? Or are there ways that you can say, all right, I understand, like, for instance, we went on a road trip lately, and so I have a long period of time where I was using my Maps app. And so it's just good to be aware of this for yourself as we start to think about, all right, what are the ways in which technology is sort of inundated in our own lives? And then lastly, what about within your personal relationships? So I have this link that Ross is going to post in the chat. And it's just asking you a simple question about your own. If you're in a romantic relationship, you can answer for that. Or if you're not, the answer for the person that you are in a relation or you are closest with. And then I'm going to switch over so you can see the results here. And this is just asking, through which of the following do you connect with your significant other most often? So are you texting them most often when you aren't in person with them, right? Are you calling them? Is it FaceTime? Do you connect a lot via other social media apps, sending them memes, videos, that sort of thing? All right, so we've got one for phone call. Some through text. I'll give it a few more seconds and then hit refresh one more time. Okay, so far pretty split evenly between text, phone call. Oh, there's a Snapchat. Okay. So if you spend some time thinking about these different platforms, you may not know a lot about all of these. I certainly don't use all of these, but there are different functions for each of these platforms that make it appealing to certain people to use these more often than not. So for example, Snapchat, right, you're just sending a quick snap, usually a picture of something that connects the person with where you're at geographically or something that you're doing in the moment, a video, and then it disappears. Right? If something like a phone call, I think about this with my husband, we're checking in about, okay, what time are you going to be home? What do you want to do for dinner? That sort of thing. Not, I want to see your surroundings, right? So there's different ways in which we decide to use each of these platforms. Okay, so just good to know moving forward. So we're first going to talk a little bit about the role of technology, the good side of things. So things that are positive influences in our romantic relationships. And the first is that with the growth of social media platforms and development of technologies like video chat, it's just really increased the way that we're able to connect with our partners. And that can be a really good thing, especially for people who may be in long distance relationships or people in the military who are deployed for long periods of time. That ability, unlike several decades ago, gives us the chance to be able to connect and stay in a place where we know a lot about what's going on in our partner's life when we're not geographically with them, right? So, and additionally, relationship formation. So I don't know if many of you have looked into the prevalence of online dating apps, but this is one of the most popular ways that young people are now creating relationships is through that platform, those different platforms, and it gives you the chance to meet people who are not in your geographical location. Right? I have a client right now who every time she travels within a couple of hours of home, make sure she checks that dating app that she's on so she can match with somebody new and potentially meet up with somebody while she is out of town. Right. So that sort of thing is making us able to connect with those who are much farther outside of our region. The quality and the content of communication for some is also improved by technology in our lives. So I'm going to talk about attachment style in a little bit here, but I also know that for people who have that insecure attachment style, sometimes using technology to communicate more vulnerable pieces of information to their partner feels much safer than if they were to do it in person. So I have a client right now who I'll talk a little bit about later, who really appreciates the ability to sit and think through the text that she's creating to send to her partner. And she can reread and make sure the message that she wants to send to them is what is actually going to be communicated, and can really spend a lot of time on that. Whereas in person, she sometimes feels like she gets flustered and isn't able to really speak her mind. So that role of technology and our research does support that some people really appreciate that asynchronous kind of communication and more time to be able to think through that. So now on to a little bit more of the negative side of technology, and certainly there's a lot more research out there about the role of technology in terms of the negatives. So it does kind of get a bad rap. So I'm hoping that we can sort of talk through at the end here how we can switch from that more negative side over into the positives. Let me use this. Okay. All right, so first, 51% of Americans, and it's from a 2020 poll, say that their partner is often or sometimes distracted by their phone when they are trying to have a conversation with them. And I was just talking to Ross about this a few minutes ago. And we probably all had that experience where we're trying to connect with somebody and you notice that they are really distracted by what's going on their phone, either trying to avoid it or they're not avoiding it and they have their phone up and are distracted while you're trying to engage with them. It's really frustrating. Right, so that can lead to a lot of other relationship factors. Our research says that that leads to more negative relationship satisfaction, negative relationship quality for the person who is on the receiving end of that, right? Additionally, with the increasing amount of ways that we can connect through technology, it's presented a lot of opportunities for what we in the literature is called cyber dating abuse, or you can think of it as intimate partner violence, but just via technology, right? And this is, again, sort of where a lot of my personal research lies. And in the literature, we say any time that communication technology is used to threaten, harass, or control one's romantic partner, that's what is described as cyber abuse. Now, this can occur a lot of different ways, as you might imagine. As I was talking about before, the many different social media platforms that we have create different ways that abuse can happen over technology, right? So some of the most common forms of cyber dating abuse occur when that technology is used to exert control over one's partner. So for example, monitoring where your partner is or what they're doing. A lot of those GPS apps or sharing your location allows you to do that, or putting one's partner down just via text. Another is unwanted invasion of privacy. So using social networking passwords without their partner's permission. So that can create a lot of conflict within the relationship if you have not laid out some ground rules in the relationship for how those passwords will be used. Another one that is really prevalent with adolescents is sexting, and sexting alone is not necessarily in the literature considered cyber abuse, but it can become a form of cyber abuse when somebody is pressured to send a sexual or nude photo of oneself. And there's a lot of growing concern for females in particular, female adolescents especially, because there's a lot of coercion and spreading sexual rumors or spreading private pictures or videos that include nudity through social media. So that's sort of what is encompassed when we talk about cyber abuse or cyber dating abuse. Another piece that you have to consider when thinking about assessing for technology use in couple relationships is how jealousy can become an issue. So there's some research that suggests increased Facebook use. So the more that you use Facebook significantly predicts Facebook related jealousy, right? So there's sort of a feedback loop here that these authors are suggesting, where using Facebook exposes people to more ambiguous information. We're going to talk about ambiguity in a little bit. And then the more that they have that ambiguous information about their partner, they want to use Facebook to try and figure out what is going on, which picture did they like and why did they like that? Does this person have a relationship with my partner that I don't know about? Right, so that's something to consider here. And then lastly, emotional regulation can directly impact how one engages with their technology. So whether or not somebody is able to have an intense emotional reaction and can regulate that really impacts whether or not they use that technology for good or for bad in their romantic relationship. Okay, so on to a little bit about how attachment style is impactful. And some of you may have a lot of background on attachment. Some of you may just need a refresher or may hear for the first time. So I'll talk a little bit more about this specifically, but insecure attachment styles, anxious and avoidant specifically, there's been a lot of growing research about how that impacts the way somebody uses their technology in relationships. So I'm suggesting that it's a really good idea to have an idea about what kind of attachment style the people that you're working with have. So anxious attachment style predicts cyber stalking related behaviors in romantic relationships where you're really using technology to learn more about what your partner is doing and to sometimes use that in really controlling ways. An insecure attachment style also predicts persistently pursuing someone intrusively using those electronic forms of communication, specifically with college females. Okay, so this slide, I really like how this table lays out attachment styles. And if you don't know much about attachment, our attachment forms with our caregivers when we are very young based on how they meet our needs, right? And there's a lot of research now that suggests, depending on how our caregivers in our youth can meet our needs, predicts how our anxious or secure attachment looks when we get to adulthood. So those early patterns really carry forward when we're in romantic relationships. So if you're, a good thing to note here, and this is why I also really like this table, is our attachment style informs how we see ourselves and it informs how we see others. So if our caregivers had consistently met our needs when we're young, we typically have a secure attachment style, meaning that we have a positive view of ourselves and we have a positive view of others. And so the self dimension might sound like I'm really worthy of love and I'm capable of getting the love and support that I need. And the other dimension, others are willing and able to love me. So I want to go through what this sounds like when it comes to technology and why these two ideas of attachment and technology use are really enmeshed. So if somebody has a secure attachment style and they are in a romantic relationship where technology is used frequently and say, for example, something comes up where they see that their partner has liked another, I'll say this is a heterosexual relationship where the male partner liked a female's picture on Facebook. If you're in a secure, if you have a secure attachment style, you might see that and say, well, you know, I might be kind of worried about that, but I know that I'm worthy of love and my partner's able to give that to me and does give that to me. So I don't attribute that specific behavior to something that's negative about me or negative about my partner. On the other hand, in anxious attachment styles and avoidant attachment styles, this can look a little bit different. So I want to go through especially these two pieces here. So within an anxious attachment style, somebody might say, you know, I'm not worthy of love. They have a real negative view of their self. I'm not capable of getting the love that I need without being angry and clingy. And others are capable of meeting my needs, but they might not do so because of my flaws. Others are sort of untrustworthy and might abandon me, right? So with the client that I was speaking about earlier that has an anxious attachment style, we've talked a lot about that internal belief that she's not really worthy of love. And that others are capable, but they might not do so because she believes she has a lot of flaws, right? So when she is interacting with her partner online, and this happened quite often in her past relationships, if he was out on his own, there was a lot of anxious stalking through different social media sites and looking at the person that she knew he was with to see if they were posting anything that would give her a clue into what he was doing, because there was just a lot of belief that he's going to abandon me. He doesn't really love me because I have so many flaws. So there's a lot of talk about, okay, can you set this technology aside while he's out and trust that, you know, he's doing what he says that he's going to do. On the other hand, with avoidant attachment style, the person does believe I'm worthy of love. I'm capable of getting the love and support that I need, but others are either unwilling or incapable of loving me. Others are untrustworthy to meet my needs. So in this case, and I have another client who is a little bit older individual female, who sort of fits this mold. And she talks a lot about, well, it feels really nice when I can connect with someone over technology at that distance, right? And I can keep them at a distance by talking a lot over social media, and we can text a lot, and we can even call and talk on the phone for multiple hours a day. But as soon as it becomes a little bit more intimate and they start to learn more and more about me, right, that feeling of, okay, others are unwilling to accept all the parts of me. And so that feels a little bit strange. So we talked some then about, okay, you've realized there's not any red flags when you talk to this person online. You know, what are the barriers to really increasing that emotional connection and being more vulnerable in person? Is it your avoidant attachment style that's making you say, no, I only want to speak with them over my technology? Okay, so we've gotten to this point of assessment where maybe you are working with couples and you see, okay, I'm noticing there are some negative interactions when it comes to using technology with their partner. There's sort of a twofold approach that the literature suggests in using for assessment and later intervention. So the first is the couple and family technology framework. And this framework, developed by Kat Hertlein, evaluates how technology affects the structure and the process of relationships. Okay, so when it comes to the structure, we're talking about rules, roles, and boundaries within the relationship. So this is a chance when you're evaluating and assessing in your sessions with couples, right? What are the rules that you have laid down for using technology within your relationship, right? Is it okay for your partner to friend other females? Is it okay for your partner to send them private messages? Is it okay that I check what you're doing over these social media sites? Can I have your password, right? All of these rules and boundaries are really important to take note of when you're assessing. Okay, so it also evaluates the process of relationships. So the way that these relationships are initiated, the way they're maintained, and the way that they're terminated. Okay, and the framework posits that there are these 7 specific characteristics of technology, and she's made it really easy with these 7 A's. This that will hopefully help to people to remember it. But these 7 A's are ways that you can think through how technology affects the structure and process of relationships. So it gives you a chance to sort of think through each of these in terms of assessment. So how accessible technology is in the relationship, how affordable is it, how one can be anonymous through technology. So is there a piece there that, like I was talking about before, does it seem a little bit easier to talk about more vulnerable conversations if that anonymous piece of being behind a screen, or if you've ever heard the term keyboard warriors, does that make it easier to express something more vulnerable? And is that appropriate for the relationship? Would your partner be okay with that, or would they rather say, okay, this is a really tough thing that we're discussing, why don't we wait till we're in person for that? How approximate technology is to real world situations. So to really think through with these couples, okay, if you guys are FaceTiming, is that an appropriate way to express some of these deeper emotions because that mirrors a real world situation versus something like Snapchat or Instagram or direct messaging? Is there a way that we can get this to be close to a real world situation? Then acceptability, and that steps into how acceptable are different situations when you're using technology with your partner, setting up those rules and boundaries pretty early about how you want to use those. Ambiguity, and I'm sure if you're a couples therapist, this one has probably come up pretty often. Misreading sometimes messages that partners send. So that is a real danger when it comes to trying to have some of these larger conversations or conflict over text, is because messages can be misinterpreted, right? The message that the person is intending to send might not be what was received. So really talking through, does that happen in your relationship? Is this a sign that maybe you need to set aside those conversations for later? Okay. And then accommodate is the last one, accommodation. So can technology be used to accommodate desires that one might not be able to do in real life? And that can kind of get into this side conversation about infidelity over social media and technology or pornography use. Is that something that is appropriate in the relationship? So these 7 things are just ways that you can think through better assessment. Now, the second part of this assessment comes from viewing cyber abuse as a form of intimate partner violence. And so it's probably more likely that you've had more education or training on how to assess and treat traditional IPV. And I know in my own experience, that was definitely the case. We didn't talk a whole lot about how abuse looked over technology, but we did talk a lot about, how do we assess for if we see a couple and it sounds like there is some abuse happening. So the first thing to keep in mind is to maintain a systemic stance, right? To know that it's not a linear relationship. When it comes to abuse, there's often a lot of different factors that you have to consider when you're talking about the situations in which violence can arise. The literature suggests to, just like IPV, when you're assessing for cyber abuse, to use written and oral interview. So maybe having a separate intake document where you're asking some specific questions about whether or not abuse exists in the relationship over technology specifically. And then also using oral interviews, so asking them more questions based on the written answers that they've given. So an example structure for the way you can assess is seeing the couple, and a lot of you might be very familiar with this structure, but to see the couple together for the first assessment and get a good idea about why as a couple they seem to be wanting to come in, and then doing the next 1 to 2 sessions individually and asking some more in-depth questions that can assess for violence and abuse over technology. And then the 4th session, you can kind of bring them back together and review the treatment plan based not only on what they've said when they're together, but also the information that they've shared when they're alone. And a good place to start really is just to, tell me about how smartphones and technology are used in your home. That alone, just providing an open-ended question like that is a really good way to just jump in and get them thinking like, okay, my therapist is really interested in how this is used in my life. And this is an appropriate space to talk about technology, even though sometimes that's a very private thing. Okay, now thinking about suggestions for intervention. So because we are really thinking.
Morgan, can I ask you a question before we get on this one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry about that. What's your experience been with couples or couples, families, whatever, but you were talking about couples in that example, in terms of their insight or lack of insight into their technology use patterns and how that may be playing in? It's like when you had us look at screen time when we first started today, I know that's an experience for a lot of people that can be surprising, and I'm just curious how much of a barrier that is at first and how much education and stuff it may take to raise their level of awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say for most people, at least that I've worked with in my own private practice, they're not very aware of how technology and their relationship are intertwined, right? So they might know a lot about, especially younger couples, might know a lot about what constitutes violence or aggression in a relationship face to face, right? They know what verbal abuse is. If I ask them that question, how would you define that? But when it comes to technology, a lot of the types of cyber abuse that I went over, a lot of them I think would not consider those. So for example, monitoring where their partner is on some of those location, like the GPS monitoring apps, they would not say that, oh, I could see how, that might be seen as something that would be considered abuse, right? If it's not a consensual discussion and boundaries that they've considered. So I think with technology, it's just something that people have to expand their idea about how they're viewing it functioning in their relationship. So yeah, I think there is some psychoed that happens at the beginning if it seems like, okay, this is an area that tends to and form a lot of their conflicts that arises. Yeah. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did. Thank you. That was helpful.
Yeah. So with this, and many of you may be familiar with this power and control wheel, but similar to thinking through how attachment looks different with technology, you can do the same thing with this wheel too. So if we're thinking about cyber abuse as just another form of intimate partner violence, you can really think through how each of these might look when it comes to technology. So this first one, using coercion and threats, making and or carrying out threats to do something to hurt her, threatening to leave, to commit suicide, to report her to welfare, making her drop charges, making her do illegal things. So those can all happen through technology too, right? So we can understand how, you know, a female might be forced. Actually, this is an important story, I think, that sort of fits in here. My roommate, my freshman year of college, was dating somebody who used a lot of these tactics, and they became long distance when she moved into the dorm with me, and would often make her either answer the phone right away when he called, or else would resort to threats or coercion, or force her to send pictures of where she was so that she could prove that she was in the place that she said she was in. Right. So he was sort of using that form, and, you know, to her, I think that I think in her mind, she's like, well, he's not hitting me. You know, he's not in front of me yelling at me and making me feel physically threatened, but he was still very much using some of those threats and coercion to abuse her via technology. Another one, using isolation, controlling what she does, who she sees and talks to, what she reads, where she goes. You could understand how that might happen in a relationship with somebody who's saying, okay, you're no longer allowed to friend these people that you work with. You're no longer allowed to use this social media platform. You know, those sorts of things. So if you have worries about a couple experiencing some of this abuse, you can sort of use this wheel and say, what does this look like in terms of the technology that you're using? Right, so you can start off by providing some psychoeducation about IPV, right? What does traditional violence look like? But also, you know, if you bring out this wheel, you can help share some more information about what it looks like. Okay, so sort of flipping the technology from negative to positive. So I really like this idea. If people are using technology frequently in their relationship, to say, all right, there's some ways that this is being used negatively and having some negative impacts on your relationship. Can we use technology in a way that brings about some positive impacts too? So the first that comes to mind for me is sending memes that remind you of your partner. And this is the one that I sent to my husband a couple of days ago, because we have an 18-month-old, and he has a weaker stomach than I do when it comes to changing diapers. So I sent him this one that says, as we change the diaper also changes us. I could hear him back there struggling with changing her diaper. So it's something that makes us laugh, you know, to share these things. And it can be later in the day, you know, when I'm off somewhere else and think about that situation and send it to him. It's a way to stay connected when you're not in person. Another one that I suggest sometimes to clients is sending daily gratitude texts. So this one, you know, even having a reminder on your phone to say, all right, this time of day, this is what I want to make sure I send to my partner. It's something to get you thinking about the positives of the relationship. Setting boundaries around communication via technology is a really big one. This is one of the interventions I'd say is most impactful. So like we had discussed before, talking up front about whether or not discussing emotion-laden topics is appropriate over technology, right? Is this something we're okay with doing? Can we handle this? Or does it often lead to miscommunication and more conflict, right? Also agreeing on the rules for when to be away from technology. So maybe having some time in your evenings, if you're spending time with your partner, to say, all right, this is when we're going to set our phones aside and just really be present with each other. Maybe at dinner time is a good time for that. I put snubbing in here because I read a research paper recently where this is now a research term. To snub someone or phone snubbing is when you're in person with somebody and they're using their phone as a distraction and not really listening into what you're saying. So phone snubbing is now has made its way into the research. It's so prevalent. Two others to consider: what is appropriate online behavior with others? Really talking through the different situations that might be a trigger for some couples up front, and setting those boundaries, maybe even having a contract and writing some down so that it's very clear for each person. And then password sharing. Can your partner have your password to your phone? Is that okay? Can they have passwords to your social media? If not, is there a particular reason why? Is there something that feels like that's an invasion of privacy? Talking through that. So it's just important to note that transparency is important. So if you have some stricter boundaries that you're setting within your romantic relationship, just noting, being upfront about why that is. Is there something from your past maybe that's brought out that need to have a strict boundary? Okay, and then these are just two other formal assessment tools that you can use. One is based on the CTS, which you might be familiar with. That's a traditional violence assessment tool, and it's changed some of those items over into asking about violence over technology. And then the last is conflict over technology. It's an 11-item measure that asks individuals to respond concerning how often time is spent on technology and if it's a problem. So if you're into using those formal assessments with couples, that's a good place to start. All right, and then here's some references if you're interested in those.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that with us, Morgan. It's such a, I know, pressing and evolving, but also extremely important part of the work that we do and of our day-to-day lives, of trying to navigate how do I use this to be more connected and not less connected. And we want to throw it to our chat. What questions do you guys have? It is 12:43, so we've got a few minutes, plenty of time. If you want to take advantage of the wealth of wisdom that our speaker has. While people are thinking and typing, I wanted to throw something out at you. Are you familiar, or how familiar are you with programs like Covenant Eyes and other things that keep track of people's browsing history that some folks use for accountability software, or to often to help manage porn addiction?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar. I've heard of them before, but have not worked with any for individuals have used those. But yeah, I could see how that could be used for good and bad.
Yeah, it seems like as I was listening to you talk about some of the nuances, that a lot of this is so, like everything, but is so contextually dependent, because for one couple, having access to each other's location might really be a non-issue and something that helps them feel reassured or check in on something here or there, and not a problem for either partner and not being used in an abusive way. But then we could also have the same exact technology scenario that's being used to control or abuse someone.
Yes, absolutely. And I have a client right now that I do telehealth with that she does her sessions from her home, and before our sessions start, or it's usually not at the beginning, it's when she's about to dive into something more vulnerable, she always picks up her phone and checks where her partner's location is, just to make sure he's not coming home anytime soon and about to hear what she's about to say, right? So, for them, it's a way to like feel safety, and also you can check in with the person, but not as much of a monitoring in a negative way. But I have seen it the opposite way too.
Some of the stuff you mentioned about seeing this as abuse and labeling, or on the side when you're talking about the abusive topics, I do think there's a bias that we have to catch up with as a society of, well, it's not physical, so it's okay. When in reality, technology with things like location tracking and other stuff can really make it a lot easier for somebody to exercise a lot of control over someone, and it pass in a way, because now maybe it's not my partner won't let me leave home, but I can go about my day, but I have to be available at all times.
Yeah, and at all times, it's not like traditional forms of violence where you can escape that when you're not geographically with the person. It becomes a situation like you're having to worry about what they're doing at all times. So yeah, it's something that you have to encourage clients, I think, to think about differently if they're not considering that it can be used in that.
Yeah, and tell me if I'm on off base here, because I don't mind, somebody pointing out a misstep so I can be better from it. But something that I've found beneficial with couples and families working with this is to try to find an analogous non-technology type of the behavior. Like, so it feels this way with this side of with the person maybe reading through your texts or your messages when y'all have a boundary around that, and that might be feel a little easier to dismiss. But would it feel different if you found out your partner was listening at the door every time you had somebody over, to try to ground it in something more tangible that we're used to highlight the relationship dynamics instead of I guess it's a little bit more process and less content maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good example. And I think because technology is so inundated in our lives, we don't even recognize sometimes how much it is, and then thinking of another example where a client found out her partner was listening to her talk to their babysitter through their baby monitor in like a different part of the house. And like that was a piece of technology. I was like, wow, I never even would have thought, communication technology, that's a piece that is now has brought conflict to their relationship, whether or not the baby monitor is on while she's talking.
Dang, weaponized baby monitor.
Yeah.
Morgan, thank you so much again for your time. We really appreciate you coming and speaking on behalf of MHA and partnering with us. I want to raise attention to a couple of dates that MHA Spartanburg has coming up. On September 14th, we're going to have our next installment of our bi-monthly educational series. That's going to be with Jessica Lyles, who is a LISW in Spartanburg. She's going to be talking about how to be healthy during holidays. We put that one in September so that we could all get prepped and ready for Thanksgiving and Christmas and navigating those relationships, whether they're good, bad, or it depends. October 24th, we will have our 8th annual symposium on mental health issues. It's going to be in Spartanburg at the Piedmont Club again. It's an all-day training. There is a cost. You'll be able to register on our website, but we will have 5 speakers come to talk about a variety of issues. Great time to get CEs. Won't fit in before this renewal, but this is a good time to not procrastinate and go ahead and get some lined up for the next cycle. You be on the lookout to our attendees for an email with a survey. Please fill that out if you have time over the next week or two. It helps us with our content. It helps make sure that we're providing things that are good and accessible and meaningful. And if you're interested in a CEU, you have to complete a survey via email to get that. And you'll go through the process of purchasing that through regional site. You'll get a follow-up email with further instructions on it. Morgan, I'll give it to you, or Dr. Strickland, excuse me. Let me use your titles here. You earned them. Is there anything you want to say before we close out and wrap up? I'll give you the last word.
No, just if you have any questions or if you want help getting connected with any of these other references, if you don't have access to them, I'm happy to do so.
Awesome. Thank you. And a reminder to our attendees that these trainings are recorded and posted to our YouTube page. So if you want to review something that Dr. Strickland said, please swing on over there and check it out. Otherwise, we will see everybody, or a lot of you, hopefully, on September 14th for our next event. Thanks. Hope you guys have a good Thursday.
Thanks, Ross.